If you listen to the podcast I do with my buddy Destin called No Dumb Questions, you know that there is, I think, Swedish rock band that I really like called Sabaton, and they sing songs about people who do heroic things in warfare. Probably they've been pen to paper all week here, frantically writing their next album. And there's one song in particular that I think they're super well known for and that I absolutely love, and it's about the Winged Hussars, this elite Polish unit that wore all this silver armor and had these super long single-use spears, and they rode into battle on horses, these unbreakable charge. They had some kind of like little wheel-lock pistol or something they took with them as well. They were great at distance, great at hand-to-hand combat, and when Vienna was under siege by the Ottomans, all hope seemed lost. The Polish Winged Hussars arrived and turned the tide and saved the day. And Europe was saved, and Austria was saved, and Vienna was saved, and the Ottomans were pushed back, and it's an amazing song. Maybe I'll see if Jeff can link it down in the show notes. So if you haven't heard it, it's just weirdly, oddly, strangely enthralling, even if it's not your musical style at all. But there's something about that imagery that, I mean, you're all conjuring it in your head right now from a movie or from something where the cavalry shows up, where the thing that everybody's been waiting for arrives when Gandalf is at the top of the hill and he's going to charge down against all the orcs and monster things and save the day for the people who are holed up in the castle, which I think was kind of meant to be an allusion to that Winged Hussar kind of moment. But you can draw on 100 different images that you've seen in film of the cavalry showing up, the heroes showing up. And what happens whenever that occurs? There's always some kind of that was pathetic. I really thought that was going to come out better. Jeff, do not edit that out. That horrible horn sound stays. But it's the trumpet that says to the whole battlefield, hey, things are about to change, and we're going to rally the troops, and we're going to go, and we're going to do this thing. And likewise, in Matthew chapter 24, after what seems like an entire chapter of, that sounded bad. Oh, that also sounded bad. That sounded like some people might die there. That sounds like gross and blasphemous and horrible. Then finally, at the end, as it looks like all hope is lost and everything is going wrong in this predicted era at the end of things, then there's this trumpet blast. Then the cavalry shows up, and it's the Son of Man. It's the hero of the whole story. It's the character who we've been following along with all along, but he's different now. He's not this meek, restrained character who, though he has a very quiet and subtle strength to him, he's taken the abuse of his critics. He's letting stupid people insult him and call him out. He's letting people lie about him. He's going to let people charge him with false accusations all the way to the point of voluntarily going to a cross and dying in like the grisliest way that the Romans had thought of to kill a person here in just a couple of chapters. And so as we've been going through Matthew together, we figured out that this is the main character and this is the hero, and everything about the Old Testament says that deliverance is supposed to come through this character, and that's definitely the Messiah. He ticks all the boxes. He has this power, but he's always holding it back. Like, why doesn't he just do what the disciples want and give in to his anger and do this righteous retribution and straighten out everything that's stupid? But he doesn't. Well, at least until right here, because now he shows up and he's different. Now the hero seems more like we imagine a hero to be. And it looks like he is coming to sort things out. And if we think about that even for a second, as we look at this passage that I still haven't read to you, but I'm going to in just a minute, it pretty quickly, I think, should pivot our brains from, the Winged Hussars arrived. It's the Ride of the Rohirrim. Gandalf is on the hillside right there. This whole thing's going to work out. It's amazing. Yeah, it's starting to knock some skulls. You move from that really quickly to this realization, like, this is kind of terrifying, because this is God no longer showing restraint to the degree that he has shown when he was here in the flesh. And that was pretty intimidating in and of itself. People marveled at him. People wondered at him. People were freaked out by him. People were like, yeah, this is just too much power. We don't want you here. Please leave our region. And Jesus just meekly went along with all of that stuff. But now there's something scary here. Now, if you recall, back in the day when we talked about you can't really have the tiger without the claws, now we're starting to see the claws. We're starting to see the teeth a little bit. Matthew 24, the disciples are like, when's all this stuff going to happen? What's going to be the sign of your coming in the end of the age? Jesus is like, a whole bunch of world stuff is going to happen. World kingdom, beginning world kingdom. Don't worry about that. It's going to hurt, but that's just normal stuff. Stuff that seems like the end of the world to you isn't the end of the world. Then there's going to be some kind of profaning, some kind of grievous blasphemy of something that is holy, of the holy place, and that is going to send stuff into some kind of dark spiral, that might be a very difficult time for everybody. And when things start getting crazy right there, people are going to come out and be like, oh, it's the Son of Man. Like, oh, he's returning. He's right here. That's probably it over there. Look, let me make 10 good points for why that guy right there in Florida is probably the Son of Man. And Jesus is like, don't listen to any of that stuff. Don't get into that candy van. That is a fake. But then in verse 29, we get to the actual answer to the question, or at least as close as the answer comes to what the sign of the end of all this stuff and the arrival of the Son of Man is going to look like. Once again, it goes like this, 24-29. Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky and all the nations of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory, and he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. The reader is meant to understand that there is drama in this moment, that the stakes have been building, that it looks like all hope is lost. And then it's not just any cavalry that arrives. It's not Gandalf that arrives. It's not even the legendary winged Hussars who've never lost ever who arrive. It is the master of all creation, the one with whom no one can argue, the one who, if he stops holding back on his glory, will defeat all evil and deception and death and everything that's broken about existence in an instant. And he's held this stuff back in patience up till this moment. And as a reader, the whole way through, you're like, I know you got more. And I think I want to see what that looks like, but also maybe I'm a little afraid to see what that looks like. Well, this is when it happens. And in that moment, as this heavenly trumpet blast is described as occurring, the angels who Jesus did not come and have bail him out of being executed on a cross here in a couple chapters, those same angels are now fully under his command, and he's fully weaponizing them to do what he wants to do. And what does he have them do? Not go out and wage some kind of war or something. He has them go and redeem. Like, do the thing that he specifically referenced the angels doing all the way back in Matthew chapter 13 during the interpretation of the parable of the net, and intoned also in the parable of the wheat and the tares, my favorite one in the whole New Testament. So maybe when we were reading those parables in Matthew 13, we're like, oh yeah, figuratively there's some kind of reckoning or sorting out, and like there's some kind of karma, and like good for good and bad for bad, and you'll learn your lesson in the afterlife or the pseudo afterlife or something. This passage makes it sound like this thing is actually going to happen. I mean, this is all presented as though this will be a physical, actual end of things. And maybe some people take it figuratively, but generally the historical Christian position on this, and I think the strongest literary read just based on what we see on the page here, is that now there will be a very dramatic physical unfolding of history at the end of things. And the reason that nobody's going to be like, no, I think that's that guy right there in the candy van, I think that's him out in the desert, is that it's not going to be like a normal thing. It's not going to be like the craziest thing you ever saw, but still within the boundaries of normal. There'll be no debate about when the Son of Man returns, according to this text, according to Matthew, according to the words he records from Jesus, because this is going to be so stinking other. This will not be current events. This will not be a news story. This will not be an opinion piece. This will be epistemically other from everything we've ever encountered, or that any living being who is alive at this point has ever encountered. Now, look, I understand that at this point we run into a difficult moment for a whole bunch of you who would say, yeah, I think there's a God. I think the Bible's from God. It's reliable. I'm down with the whole Jesus thing, kingdom values, like living a good life and imitating Jesus. That is appealing, but I don't know about the sky horse thing. And it's kind of hard for me to picture like a whole bunch of angels. Like, are they going to look like the ones in the Bible with like the eyeballs and the rings and all of that? They're going to look more like the angels in video games. That would be better for me. I know some of you are in that boat right now, and I don't view it as my job on this podcast to talk you out of being in that boat. I think this is a difficult thing to conceive of. I think it challenges belief and perception, and I think it's supposed to be hard, and I don't think that would be a surprise to Matthew. In fact, it looks like Jesus is implicitly acknowledging that this thing would be really difficult to think through with the way he answered the question, because he's overwhelmingly not given any data. There's nothing that describes how he's going to pull that off physically. Like, what are the angels like? Are you going to see him? What are they going to do? How long does it take to collect all the people from the four corners of the earth? Are there four corners? Because I think it's a globe. Is that just an expression? There's so many things that he could get into that he just doesn't. So what I'm saying with all of that is if you're one of those who are in a place where you're like, yeah, I guess I'm a Christian, but that's kind of hard for me to understand. High five. I get you. Here's the literal, that was the high five sound. If you're in a place where you are one of the many people who I know listen to this program and you're not a Christian, which I cannot stress enough, you are awesome for wanting to think through something that is not reflective of where you're at belief-wise at this point. Even if I were not a Christian, I think it is a stroke of literary genius that the Bible does not disproportionately fixate on the unclear but vaguely parameterized details of the story of the end of things. If the Bible was disproportionately obsessed with that all the time, I think it creates a mess because you lose the narrative. But if the Bible didn't acknowledge it at all, then we would have to think that this was just a political thing that got out of hand and it only made sense in the moment. Yet clearly, the promises we're dealing with here, the values we're dealing with here, span the scope of history and make very large claims that require a completion in the same way that the Old Testament gives us dun-dun-dun-dun, and then begs for the dun-dun that is Jesus. So now Jesus is giving us a new dun-dun-dun-dun. See a key change there? Dun-dun. He understands that as interesting and compelling as all of this has been up to this point, it isn't a complete story and it doesn't round it out. If there were no final chapter to this story, I don't think I'd have any interest in pursuing it further, because that would mean that all we're really dealing with here is probably the most effective life philosophy to come out of the classical ancient Near Eastern and Mediterranean world. And while that might be nice, it's not enough to garner my attention or to command the kind of interest or respect or reflection or, heck, bending the knee and obedience that this has commanded over the centuries. In short, if this passage is difficult for you, I am right there with you, and I totally get it. I can't conceive of what this would look like, but also, in short, that's kind of the point. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.